situation. So I want to thank Senator Durbin, who's protected the American worker, but I want to tell my colleagues in the Senate that this is a day I've been hoping and waiting for. Thank you all so very much.
Madam President. Madam President, first let me thank Senator Graham, Senator McCain, Senator Rubio, Senator Flake, on our side, Senator Schumer, Senator Menendez, and my friend Senator Bennett. The 7 of us came together to create a bill, and in the end we did a lot more. We created a bond of friendship and trust and a life experience that none of us will ever forget. Now, each of us brought our special pleadings to this negotiation. I argued for protection of refugees, American workers, access to immigration courts and counsel, reforming the flawed H-1B program, a path to citizenship that was a challenge but fair. But my colleagues knew from the start that there was one issue that was more important to me than any other. Madam President, it was 12 years ago, when I first introduced the DREAM Act. I did it for this young woman, Theresa Lee. They were about to deport her from Chicago back to Korea. She was 18 years old. She didn't know any other country but the United States. She'd been accepted at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. She was an outstanding pianist, and she was about to be deported. I thought that was wrong, and I introduced the DREAM Act to help her, and it turns out hundreds of thousands just like her. Incidentally, this story ends well. She finished her education. She is now working on a Ph.D. in music. She played in Carnegie Hall. And she married an American, and she's a citizen. Would America have been a better place if Theresa Lee had been deported? Of course not. Over the years, the plight of Theresa Lee and this bill, the DREAM Act, became a cause, a national campaign. In the beginning, teenagers used to come up to me in Chicago, filled with emotion, in the dark of night, meet me at my car with tears in their eyes and say, "I'm a dreamer. Can you help me?" Over time, their numbers grew, and so did their courage. They stood up, as they have so many times in so many places, and said, "I'm willing to fight to be part of America's future." It wasn't easy for them. A few years ago, I had a press conference right here in the Capitol. I invited the Dreamers to come and tell their stories. A hate-filled congressman from Colorado called the immigration authorities and said, "Arrest those kids." Well, they weren't arrested, and they left that press conference even more determined to see the DREAM Act become a reality. Time and again, we called the bill on the Senate floor, and it failed. We just couldn't break the filibuster. 2.5 years ago, the galleries were filled with Dreamers in caps and gowns, and we called the bill for a vote, and we lost. 55 votes, and we couldn't break the filibuster. One of the saddest meetings I've ever had took place afterwards. I went downstairs and met with these Dreamers after the bill failed. Their heads were down, and they were crying, and they said, "What can we do?" I said to them, "I'm never giving up on you. Don't give up on me." Well, today I have a message for them. For Gabby, for Tolu, and all the Dreamers in the galleries here and all around the country. Your courage inspired us. Your determination kept us going. And your faith in the only country you've ever called home has been rewarded. This bill before us has the strongest DREAM Act ever written. I listened to my colleagues come to the floor and speak about immigration. And those of us who support this bill haven't talked a lot about the details of the bill. We've talked about what this means to us personally, in our personal lives, what immigration means to America. So in full disclosure, I have to tell you, Madam President, that the first Dreamer in my life was brought to America at the age of 2. She was the child of Lithuanian immigrants, and she grew up in poverty but was determined to become a citizen. Her dream came true when she was naturalized at the age of 24. That was my mother. and I dedicate this vote today to her memory. For anyone in this chamber who believes this is just another vote, go to a naturalization ceremony. Watch those new citizens with those flags in their hands as they take that oath to be part of this country. You cannot help but feel the emotion that courses through them at that moment. Let me say a final word about the Senate. I am proud to represent the great state of Illinois. I am proud to be one of 1,947 Americans who've ever had this honor to stand on the floor as a member of the United States Senate. But we're elected to make this nation better. The 8 of us came together across the aisle. We cussed one another, we cheered one another, and we wrote a bill together. Now to my fellow colleagues in the Senate, it's your turn. Reach across the aisle and show the American people this Senate can still rise to the challenge. Show this skeptical nation that their faith in our founding fathers will be honored by our generation of senators. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I'd like to thank Senator Durbin for his compelling remarks and his deep and abiding concern for many years concerning the so-called Dreamers. I'd like to thank all of my other 5 colleagues for their involvement, and I'd also like to thank Senator Corker and Senator Hoeven for their effort on this bill. I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator Flake, for his outstanding work. And I'd like to also mention Senator Lindsey Graham, who gave his own unique perspective, as well as my friend from Colorado, Senator Bennett, and also Senator Schumer, who has played such an important and valuable leadership role. And the word friend is tossed around this body quite often, perhaps not with as much sincerity as we'd like, but these 7 individuals are my friends. But more importantly, they are friends of America. They are friends who realize we are sent here by our constituents to achieve results, and I don't know at this particular time of a greater issue that we should be involved in. We've heard a lot of personal stories here today, and I am deeply moved by all of them. And there's another human story. In fact, there are millions of them. And I'd like to tell you a few of them. Over the last week, the Arizona newspapers have reported that 8 bodies were found in the Arizona desert. The Arizona desert today, my friends, is in triple-digit temperatures. On June 21st, the Arizona Republic reported that, quote, 4 men may have been dead 3 days before their bodies were found in the Arizona desert by U.S. Border Patrol agents. 2 men had Mexican identifications and the other 2 didn't have identification. On June 24th, the Associated Press reported Maricopa County Sheriff deputies have found another body in the Arizona desert near Gila Bend, just days after 4 bodies were discovered in the same area. No identification was found on the body, and there were no signs of trauma or foul play. June 27th, today, the Arizona Daily Star reported that, quote, 3 decomposing bodies were found by Tucson Sector Border Patrol agents in the desert over the weekend. The Yuma Sun reported yesterday there have been 12 people rescued from the desert by Yuma Sector agents. 6 others were not located and died in the wilderness. The list goes on and on. Since 2007, the last time we tried to pass this legislation, more than 2,425 immigrants have died trying to cross our southwest border. These are people who wanted to come to this country not because they wanted to do anything but realize the American dream. That's what they want. That's what they risked their lives and, in fact, gave their lives for. And, yes, they did so illegally. And they're willing to pay a penalty for crossing our border illegally. But shouldn't we give them the same chance that we've given generation after generation of immigrants who have come to this country, wave after wave of Irish and Italians and Jews and Poles, and now people from all over the world? Shouldn't we do that? Isn't it in us to bring 11 million people out of the shadows that are now being exploited and have none of the protections of citizenship? Well, how do we address some of these. This legislation does secure the border, and I can tell you from 30 years of being on the border, this bill secures the border, and anyone who says it doesn't does not understand our security needs, because I have been there and I have seen the technology that was developed in Iraq and Afghanistan, which will give us surveillance. Yes, there's a bill with 20,000 new additional Border Patrol agents, but the fact is that the technology that's there now will give us the ability for 100% situational awareness and ability to intercept. I guarantee it to my friends because I saw it work. And that technology is in being. There's 700 miles of total fencing that will be added. 700 miles. And my friends, we will also have additional Border Patrol, as we know. What is the key to this bill? The key to this bill is not only because the fencing on the border and the Border Patrol, but it's the 40% of the people who are here illegally who came here and overstayed their visas. They didn't cross the southwest border. So what do we do about that? We dry up the magnet, and that's the E-Verify program, which makes sure that every person who wants to come to this country illegally will know that that person cannot get a job here. And we will have within 5 years an E-Verify system that I am confident, and more so are the people who are really knowledgeable, that that will be a foolproof system with 95% effectiveness. This legislation will not only give us a secure border, but it will address the key element, because people who now want to come here illegally will know that they cannot, and employers will know that if they hire someone who's here illegally, they will pay a severe penalty for doing so. We've got to dry up the magnet. So today there's 11 million people. They're in violation, and they don't have the protection of our laws. And I'd like to mention, again, about the people who are coming across our borders. There's a thing called coyotes. You know what coyotes are? They're drug cartel people. They're the most evil people on earth. They take these people in groups and they bring them across the border, and many times, the reason why we find these bodies in the desert, they say, we're leaving you, Tucson's right over the hill. And thousands have died in the desert. And you know what they do sometimes when they get them all the way up to Phoenix? They keep them in drop houses, jammed together, and they hold them for ransom under the most unspeakable conditions. And you know what else they do? They abuse the people that they bring up. And I won't go into the details of how they do that. It's an unacceptable situation. 50,000 Mexican citizens have been killed by the drug cartels. Last year, hundreds of migrants were missing or killed in Mexico. More than 20,000 were kidnapped, and many are regularly beaten. The Mexican government doesn't know exactly how to handle this situation, and it's all complicated by drugs, which we are creating the demand for. Madam President, I've had the great opportunity in my life to have many experiences. And the one I'll never forget was in July 4th of 2007. Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Joe Lieberman, my beloved friend, and I were in Baghdad for 4th of July. General Petraeus had requested that we speak at a reenlistment ceremony where about 800 brave young men and women serving the military were reenlisting to stay and fight. There was another group of some 80-some who were green card holders who, because they had joined the military, had an accelerated path to citizenship. I was honored to be there. I was honored to speak to them. In the front row, there was 4 empty seats with boots on them. Men and women, men who were green card holders who had lost their lives in combat in the previous 48 hours. Men who had been willing to risk their lives and serve our country in order to be citizens of this country. I've never been so deeply moved. Madam President, let's give these 11 million people a chance to do the same. I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, I know that the Gang of 8 members who were responsible for the basic framework of this legislation have done tremendous work and have advanced the substance and tone of our discussion immeasurably since 2007. which is the last time we had a major immigration bill on the floor. And I think the American people now understand that the status quo is simply unacceptable. We have a broken immigration system, which, in the words of my friend from Florida, Marco Rubio, is effectively a de facto amnesty, because we have a system that is lawless, and it's uncontrolled, and it operates neither in the best interests of our country economically nor represents our values. The American people are famously generous and compassionate. As a society, we believe in second chances. All of us have benefited from second chances in life, and I believe the American people believe that those who have come here to America in violation of our immigration laws, that if they're willing to step up, pay a fine, register, and live in compliance with our laws, that they should get a second chance too. Matter of fact, polling shows that the American people support a permanent legalization program for 11 million immigrants living in the United States, but only if they are convinced that the Congress has made sure that they will never, ever have to do this again. In other words, I believe that the American people believe that the borders were controlled, if they believe that we had a biometric entry-exit system which would track visitors who enter the country and who never leave, which is 40% of illegal immigration, if they believe we actually had an effective E-Verify or employment verification system that would determine at the work site that when someone shows up to work that they are legally qualified to work in America, I believe that if we had those three legs to the stool in place, that the American people would do, once again, the generous thing, the compassionate thing, and give second chances to the 11 million people who are here. But the problem with this bill, and I say this more out of sadness than anything else, the promises of this bill have simply not been kept. We were told 6 months ago that the pathway to citizenship was contingent upon border security and these other enforcement measures being taken place. When it wasn't, I introduced an amendment which would condition the transfer from probationary status to legal permanent residency on a certification that the objectives on operational security of the border had been met. I believe that by doing so, we would realign all the incentives for the political parties, for independents, for conservatives, for liberals. Everybody would be focused like a laser on how do we get this done? How do we hit that mark? And I believe if we had had a mechanism in this bill which did not depend on Congress keeping future promises of performance, I believe that we could regain the trust and confidence of the American people such that we could get to a successful outcome. Unfortunately, as you know, the proposal I made to do exactly that has been rejected. And in fact, the Assistant Democratic Leader has made the point recently in June that permanent legalization has now been delinked from border security. But I believe the problems of this legislation go well beyond the border. The solution my colleagues have offered is when I offered 5,000 Border Patrol, I was told that even though the Gang of Eight bill offered 0 Border Patrol, I was told that that was a budget buster. It was simply unaffordable, 5,000 new Border Patrol. But now we find 20,000 additional Border Patrol provided for in this bill. And now we've been told that we have essentially a surge of law enforcement to the border and a huge investment in new technology and boots on the ground. But you know, the only thing missing is a plan to make sure that those people are actually effectively deployed and that technology will actually be deployed in a way that secures the border. So, you know, I know the surge worked in Afghanistan, but I'm not so sure we need a military-type surge in South Texas, and particularly in the absence of any plan to make sure people are going to be effectively utilized. What's more, Madam President, I would say I don't believe that the promises made in this bill will ever be kept. I don't believe we'll ever have an extra 20,000 Border Patrol agents. I don't believe the huge investment in technology will ever be made because it depends not just on this Congress and this administration, but future Congresses and future administrations. So you have, in essence, the American people being asked to grant a gift of a pathway to citizenship to demonstrate the typical American belief in second chances and demonstrate their compassion. But in essence, they've been tricked once again to trade that in exchange for hollow promises of future action. And I just think it's an unacceptable deal. The problems with this legislation also extend beyond that. This bill grants immediate legal status to people with multiple misdemeanors and convictions for driving while intoxicated and spousal abuse. Matter of fact, you can have been deported out of the country for having committed a crime and yet be eligible for re-entry into the country and eligible for probationary status under this bill. I think that's shocking. I understand why we would want to give people who are economic migrants an opportunity to get right with the law and to get on with their lives, but why in the world would we want to extend that generosity to people who've shown nothing but contempt for the rule of law? Well, this bill also hinders law enforcement by making confidential the information contained in applications for probationary status that are rejected. This happened back in 1986, and I remember a quote in the, I believe it was from the senior senator from New York after that time, that to the effect that that was one of the biggest sources of fraud in the amnesty of 1986. And my hope would be we would not repeat that mistake again by keeping that information confidential and away from law enforcement authorities in the effort to root out fraud and make sure that only people who legally qualify for this generosity are able to do so. The other problem with this bill is it simply is a budget buster. I was told that 5,000 Border Patrol agents that would be paid for out of the $8.3 billion trust fund created by this bill was too much. But now we have $30 billion more in additional spending being promised, and the argument is that somehow this is free money and it doesn't cost a penny because under the CBO score there will actually be a reduction in deficits. But the problem is that's double counting the money. It's the money that's coming into the Treasury because of people who are now registered, who are paying into Social Security and the like. But it takes that money to spend on these other programs and doesn't appreciate or recognize the fact that money is also going to need to be available to pay future benefits for these same people. That's double counting. That's phony bookkeeping, and we ought to reject it. The truth is this bill adds to the budget debt of additional roughly $14 billion as presently written. At a time when our debt is at $17 trillion, it strikes me as the wrong thing to do to say we're going to add further to that debt and to jeopardize our fiscal health for the country as a whole going forward. So, Madam President, I would just close with this. It gives me great pain to say that I think this is an opportunity that we have failed to take advantage of. I think we could have done better and we should have done better, and this bill is unworthy of my support, and it would be unworthy of the support of a number of members. But my hope is that the House of Representatives takes up this issue and we can somehow find our way to a conference committee with the House and produce a bill that eventually we can put on the President's desk. It will not be like this bill. I'm confident of that. The House has far different views. But what we do have that we didn't have in 2007 is, I think, a true bipartisan consensus that the status quo is unacceptable. We've got to do better. Unfortunately, this bill doesn't keep the promises that were made originally, and for that, I truly regret it.
Senator from New York.
Madam President, we're now approaching the final hour of this debate on how to fix our broken immigration system, a debate we've been having for 3 weeks here on the Senate floor, for 7 months among the Gang of Eight, and for decades in this nation. I want to profoundly thank my colleagues in the Gang of Eight. I'll have more to say about each of them after we vote, and all of my staff who did such a great job. Madam President, When I look out my window from my home in Brooklyn, I see the torch of Lady Liberty shining brightly. And I can see and feel the promise of America, the covenant of America. You see, there's an unwritten covenant between America and those who emigrate here. It says if you come here with a dream, with a will to work hard, follow the rules and contribute, we'll give you a chance to become an American, and in the process to make America a better place than it was before you got here. In choosing this country, whether it's my friend Marco Rubio's parents from Cuba or my grandparents and great-grandparents who fled persecution from Europe, immigrants bring an appreciation for the choices and opportunities that are unique to America. They often love America even more than native-born Americans, and we sometimes take that appreciation for granted. It's therefore not a surprise, Madam President, that CBO says this bill will grow our economy by 3.3% over the next 10 years and 5.4% over the next 20. CBO has simply enumerated a concept that many of us already knew. Immigrants have always been the greatest engine of economic growth, innovation, and renewal that this country has ever known. There is no greater economic engine than the long hours immigrants work with no complaint for the chance to achieve economic stability and prosperity for themselves and their families. According to CBO, it's a far greater engine for economic growth than any spending program that Democrats might traditionally propose or any tax cut Republicans might traditionally propose. Whether it's highly skilled immigrants inventing new technologies or lower skilled immigrants toiling in our fields or all those in between, immigrants have been an essential component to our American success story. To reject this basic truth in this vote today would be a direct rebuke to the lady who shines so brightly in New York's harbor. But just like today, our history has had many other instances where the fate of the American covenant with our immigrants has been tested. And in the end, it has always survived, stronger than it was before. It survived because all of us know that if America is to remain the greatest nation in the world, a beacon of hope and freedom for all to aspire to, we must always live up to the covenant that is represented by the great lady in the harbor. And this bill is our best chance and maybe our last chance to maintain that covenant through the next generation of Americans and to maintain the greatness of America. This bill includes input from almost every member of this body. I can't think of two more vocal critics of the bill than the senators from Alabama and Iowa, but even they have amended this bill in multiple places to make it better. And that's what makes this bill strong. That's what makes this bill good. It has garnered support from the most diverse coalition of groups any bill has ever seen. U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO, the faith community, including evangelicals and Catholics, the high-tech community, America's farmers and farm workers, the law enforcement community, the immigrant rights community. Now, what does this bill do? Simply put, it does three simple things. It will prevent future waves of illegal immigration. It will provide a tremendous boost for the American economy by rationalizing future legal immigration. And it will fairly and conclusively address the status of people currently here illegally. Let's look at the actual facts of what this bill does to end illegal immigration. If the bill passes, anyone who wants to try and cross the border illegally will have to get over an 18-foot steel pedestrian fence, past border agents standing every 1,000 feet apart from Brownsville to San Diego. Future waves of illegal immigration will be prevented if this bill is passed, and that's not a wish, it's not a hope, it's a fact. People have argued that we should not pass this bill because past efforts have failed to prevent illegal immigration. But let's not be so defeatist that we throw our hands up and declare we're incapable of learning from our past mistakes. Under this logic, under their logic, the famous expression would be changed. When you fall off a bicycle, make sure you never ride a bicycle again. Finally, I don't countenance the way the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in our midst got here, but they are here now, and deporting all of them is impractical, unrealistic, and wrong to consider. Our bill will tell these individuals if they're willing to keep their end of the covenant. Their road may be harder and longer than everyone else's road. A 10-year probationary period, no benefits or assistance of any kind. But it too can end with being given the chance to earn American citizenship if they work hard and pay taxes and play by the rules. So the bill is the right thing to do from top to bottom. It has more deficit reduction than our best deficit-reducing packages. It will stimulate the economy more than any stimulus bill, and it will make our border more secure than it has ever been in our history. So now there are simply no more legitimate excuses to vote against this bill. Opponents of the bill have given 3 stated excuses for opposing the bill, each of which has been resoundingly refuted. They said the process is unfair, but it's been the most open process we have seen in a long time. They said it was going to bust the budget and take away American jobs. CBO refuted that. And finally, they said the bill won't secure the border, but we have the toughest border security and enforcement in any immigration bill ever written. Here is what a vote against this bill says. It says it would be nice to reduce the debt, but not if it helps immigrants. It would be nice to grow the economy, but not if it helps immigrants. It says it would be nice to end illegal immigration in our security, but not if it helps immigrants. Those are the 3 stated reasons. The only reason left to vote against this bill is the unstated reason, opposition to a path to citizenship for the 11 million. Make no mistake about it. The support this bill has generated here in the Senate will make it impossible to ignore. I believe the support this bill will receive today in the Senate will propel it to pass the House and be placed for signature on the President's desk by the end of the year. That's because in our hearts, we know that immigrants have always been part of the fabric of America. While there have always been people who have rejected immigrants, from the know-nothings to the exclusionists, we have always seen the better angels of our nature prevail in the end. At times like these, when our better angels are tested, to reject this bill would tear the fabric of America asunder. It would declare that America no longer seeks to be the shining city on the hill that attracts and is admired by people around the globe. Pass this bill, and let's keep the American covenant alive. Pass this bill, and let the bright torch of Lady Liberty continue to shine brightly as a beacon to those around the globe for generations to come. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Alabama.
I ask the quorum call be dispensed with.
The Senate is not currently in quorum call.
I thank the Chair. As I've looked at the legislation and we've wrestled with what goes in it, I would just share with my colleagues my perspective, having been in charge of forcing federal laws as the United States Attorney in the interior of the country. We need to understand a couple of things. The border is very important. There's been wide open illegality at our borders for years. San Diego, a number of years ago, were having drugs, crime, violence, and they built a fence, and prosperity rose on both sides of the fence. Crime went down, and it just had to be done, and they've been very happy with it, and that helps a lot. And it's not at all impossible for us to get our border under control today. It's not that requires that much more than current capacity, But what we need is an absolute commitment from the President and the Director of Homeland Security to get that done, and we've lacked that. But I want to move beyond just the requirements of the border. There are other areas that are critical to having a lawful system of immigration. Those include entry-exit visas, and that includes a workplace enforcement. Under current law, Congress has passed, and actually there have been 6 laws to this effect in the last 10 years. These laws require that there be an entry-exit biometric visa system at all land, sea, and airports. The 9/11 Commission recommended that. The 9/11 Commission, when they had a review of what had been done toward accomplishing their recommendations, they went back to it and warned that we had not completed it. Its current law, it requires a biometric entry-exit system. People who come into our country today are fingerprinted, but when they leave the country, they're not checked. So we don't know if when they got their visa and they entered the country, whether or not they ever left. The arguments have been made it would cost billions and billions of dollars. But a pilot project, which I just discovered recently, I didn't know was there, dealt with a pilot project at Atlanta and one of the other airports. In Atlanta, they did this. A person goes through the airport to depart from the United States. They go by a handheld fingerprint reading machine. Police officers have them on their cars. They can stop a drunk driver and check their fingerprints right on the side of the road. You put your finger on that, they go out of the gate, and you know whether or not they've departed the country. So this is a significant technological advancement. It works. And in Atlanta, when they did that, they caught over 100 people on the watch list, people who had felony warrants out for them, people on the terrorist watch list. And they knew, and we have a record of the people who left the country. That is critical to our system. We've almost gotten there, but there's been a failure to see it happen because some people don't want it to happen. That is not in this legislation. This bill eliminates the requirement of a biometric system, and it eliminates the requirement we have an exit system at the border. It's only air and sea. That's a major diminishment of an absolutely critical part of our system. It's going to be even more critical. Why will it be more critical? Because we're going to have doubling of the number of people who come to our country on visas. And we're going to have an increased problem of visa overstays. The Congressional Budget Office warned of that in the report. It's obvious. The Citizenship and Immigration Services and the ICE officers have warned it repeatedly to us in their letters. So this has got to be a part of our system. It just has to be. And the fact that it's not in there indicates that the people who drafted the bill had no real interest in seeing enforcement be enhanced, but actually wanted to allow the enforcement to be weakened. So that's a non-starter. This has been in the law for over 10 years. And so the ICE officers have told us, look, 40% of the people now that are here illegally came by visa overstays, but that's going to increase dramatically for a lot of reasons, and one of them is we're going to double the number of people that come by visas under this bill. So they've warned us that you can't have, you warned us that this concern about a de facto amnesty will continue because we have no people on the interior of the United States to enforce the law. You're going to 40,000 Border Patrol agents, but only 5,000 people inside the interior of the entire United States of America. And this president, as part of his systematic plan to stop enforcement, has sued states and broken the 287G agreements with states that allow them to participate and help the ICE officers do their job. States can't prosecute people. States can't deport people. But states can, as part of their job, when a police officer arrests somebody for a crime or drunk driving and they identify them as being illegally in the country, they can take them to the ICE officer and help them do their job, and there are agreements to do this to this effect. What has happened? This administration has eliminated those agreements and canceled the program. I helped write the program. Lots of states were participating happily in it, and were not being forced to do anything they didn't want to do, but it allowed them to be more effective in doing their jobs. So the problem is, when you see that missing in this 1,200-page bill, but you see provision after provision after provision that focuses on other issues, focuses on issues important to special interest to help write the bill, then you begin to get suspicious about what's happening. And that's why the ICE officers and the Citizenship and Immigration Service was so concerned about not being able to participate in the program effectively and to share their views. But it's clear they didn't want their views. So President Obama, although it had been maintained pretty carefully that he wasn't involved in writing the legislation, appears he quite clearly was. They are not happy with the ICE officers. The ICE officers have actually sued Secretary Napolitano for stopping them from enforcing the law that they have sworn to enforce. They say they are being required to violate their oath and their commitment to the law by policies from politicians in the Homeland Security Department. They've written it in letter after letter after letter, openly saying the politicians in the department are overriding the law, directing us and undermining our ability to do what we're sworn to do. And they have a lawsuit pending about it. I've never heard of that officers would do that. And then we've got the confusion over the E-Verify system. Senator Portman improved the bill dramatically with his amendment, or would have. He was not able to get it up for a vote, but the E-Verify system is in place today, and it's utilized by governments and by contractors who do work for the government. And I think people who want to voluntarily use it can use it. And you give a Social Security number to your boss or your employer to be, and he runs it and checks. And what they find is that many illegal workers are using the same Social Security number as other people. And the computer in the Social Security Department catches that. And they tell the employer, there's 6 different people using this Social Security number. You shouldn't hire this person until it's been checked out. So that's the way this E-Verify system works. It takes about 3 minutes. It has a 99% correct rate. But the forces out there have blocked it. The legislation for E-Verify, even this minimum standard that's operating today, we had to fight to even get it extension. I had to hold up legislation to guarantee that they would at least extend the current system, because there are forces out there that put up big money that do not like this project. They do not like it. They want to end it, and they're afraid that it will be expanded. But any plan that pretends to be serious about workplace enforcement has to utilize the E-Verify. Well, this bill, instead of just making the system, expanding it, which wouldn't take much effort, the computers are capable of handling the numbers, instead of just doing that, then they've done it in a way that delays it for 5 years. So this, to me, indicates that there's not an intensity of interest. After the amnesty has been given, after people have been given legal status, they will be given a Social Security number. They won't be hurt by having to have their number checked. They'll have a legitimate Social Security number. They'll be legal and able to take any job out there. But the people who come in later, the people who didn't qualify, people who otherwise were criminals and shouldn't be getting a job and don't qualify for the provisional status, they won't be identified for years under this system. It indicates a lack of seriousness in the commitment. So I see Senator Grassley is here, and I would conclude, Madam President, by saying there. All right. I'll just wrap up by saying that creating a lawful system of immigration requires more than border enforcement. Border enforcement is important, but you have to have interior enforcement, you have to have workplace enforcement, you have to have entry-exit visa enforcement. This is absolutely critical. And as I have been stressing, that we haven't talked enough about here, is the bill also sets, out of its 1,200 pages, the future flow of workers into America. And our colleagues have said it's a merit-based system, and we have a point system. Unfortunately, that's not substantially correct. It looks to us like less than 15% of the people will enter into our country under their plan by a merit-based system. Canada does that. They're very happy with it. I think about 60% of their people do. So the more education you have, the more job skills you have, the more fluency you have in the language, you get more points. Under this merit-based system that has about 15% of the people covered by it, a point system, the fact that you're a brother is equal to 10 points. If you've got a 4-year college degree, that's only equal to 5. It takes a master's degree to get 10 points, to equal to the family connection points. So the point system is still heavily skewed to things other than actual job skills, education level, and ability to be productive and flourish in our society. We want to bring people to our country who are going to be able to flourish, do well, be able to find a job, not be unemployed, or if the only skill they have is one that Americans are applying for in big numbers, and they would take a job from an American unemploying an American. So we've got to create a system that serves the national interest and identify the kind of workers that the country needs and can absorb as a part of our overall million or so people that we admit each year lawfully into America. That makes sense to me. And also the guest worker programs are exceedingly complex. There's W programs, there's E programs, there's H programs. There are different kind of programs throughout this whole bill. The net result is the number of people that come not to be permanent citizens, not to be immigrants, but to come as guest workers will double under this legislation. And that makes it harder for the legal immigrant who's now new in America trying to find work to get a job if they're having to compete with guest workers. Those are the kind of things we need to be thinking about as we go forward. I want to express my appreciation to the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Chuck Grassley. He has been a student of this problem since 1986, and he shared with us his perspective on it, and he has a deep conviction that if we go through this process again, it needs to be done in a way that we can be proud of a few years later, not be embarrassed about as we were after 1986. And we would create a system that allows lawful flow to occur but stops illegal flow in the future. And that's the problem that I think this legislation has, among others. Senator Grassley, thank you for your efforts and good work, and I've enjoyed working with you. And Senator Leahy, who conducted a tough series of hearings, but he let us have votes. And we got a lot of votes in Judiciary Committee. And he asked, did anybody else have another amendment when we finished? And we got it done. That hadn't happened on the floor today. We've only had 9 votes, and 3 of those were motions to table very important amendments that deserve more consideration than that. I thank the chair. Would yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Iowa.
I would like to make an inquiry about time. We were supposed to start the last 20 minutes. Is it okay if I start now with my final remarks?
Without objection.
My colleagues have often heard me speak of my opposition to the legislation that's before us. They haven't heard me speak about my opposition to immigration reform. As I've said so many times on this floor and in committee, or even to the press, I haven't heard a single senator say that the existing system, status quo, ought to be maintained. Now, there's a lot of opinions about what should be done. So as we've seen over the last few weeks, immigration is an emotional issue that engenders strong feelings from both sides of the aisle. Saying it for a second time, everyone wants reform, but everyone has their own ideas and different solutions. Coming into the debate, I think my position has been very, very clear. And I made it very clear because I have the experience of the 1986 legislation. And that was legislation legalizing. And it didn't solve the problem. We screwed up in 1986 by not securing the border first, even though we had the intention that that would happen. Today, we're right back at the same place, talking about the same problems, proposing the same solutions. Unfortunately, the process hasn't allowed us to fundamentally improve the bill. We haven't been able to vote up or down on common sense amendments. There's been 550 amendments filed. We've taken up about a dozen. Despite the fact that the American people want the border secured before we provide a path to legalization, there appears to be a majority of this body that believe legalization must come first. And next Monday and Tuesday, I'll be holding 11 town meetings in Iowa. And I know what I'm going to hear from my people, that, yeah, we need immigration legislation, but first we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books before you consider anything new. Despite what the Gang of Eight wrote in their framework for immigration reform, legalization is not, emphasis upon not, contingent upon our success in securing our borders and addressing visa overstays. The bill won't ensure that a future Congress isn't back here 25 years dealing with the very same problems. We need a bill that ensures results. We need a bill that puts security before legalization, not the other way around. We're a nation based upon the rule of law. We have a right to protect our sovereignty and a duty to protect the homeland. Any border security measures we pass must be real and, more importantly, be immediate, not 10 years down the road. We also need meaningful interior enforcement, including allowing immigration officers to do their job and work with state and local officials. Enforcement of the immigration laws has been lax and increasingly selective in the last few years. Because federal immigration enforcement officers have been handicapped from doing their job, the states have tried to step in. But every time the states tried to step in under the 10th Amendment to protect their citizens when the federal government wouldn't do it, they've been denied the opportunity to control their own borders. The unfortunate reality is that the bill does almost nothing to strengthen interior enforcement efforts. It does nothing to encourage cooperation between federal, state, and local governments. The federal government will continue to look the other way as millions of new people enter this country undocumented. Meanwhile, the bill gives the states no new authority to act when the federal government refuses. One of the major reasons why immigration is a subject of significant public interest is the failure of the federal government to enforce existing laws. 11 million people have unlawfully entered the country, or overstayed their visas because the federal government did not deter them or take action to remove them. The bill significantly weakens current criminal laws and will hinder the ability of law enforcement to protect Americans from criminal undocumented aliens. In addition to weakening current law, the bill does very little to deter criminal behavior in the future. It ignores sanctuary cities and increases the threshold required for actions of what constitutes a crime. And regrettably, the bill is weak on foreign national criminal street gang members, an amendment that I tried to offer, but we couldn't get the other side to want to vote on whether or not gang members ought to be denied benefits of this immigration law. Furthermore, the bill falls short in protecting American workers who need and want jobs in this country. While I support allowing businesses to bring in foreign workers, they should only do so when qualified Americans are not available. I have long argued that we must enhance and expand opportunities for people who wish to work legally in the country. Yet as we do that, we cannot forget the American worker. We need to fight for them as well. Finally, I emphasize with people who come into this country to have a better life. We're proud of our country. Those of us born here don't appreciate how great this country is. When I talk to naturalization ceremonies in my state, I tell the new citizens, you're new here, you came from another land where you know things are a lot different than they are here. When you hear Americans bellyache about our great country, I hope you'll tell these Americans that were born here, including this American, that this is the best country in the world and how it's different from your own country, that you came here for a better life. We're a compassionate people, and we're also the best country in the world. But we're a great country because we've always abided by the rule of law. The rule of law is what makes opportunities that we have possible. So, I'm going to vote against this bill today. That's no surprise to anybody. But I have hopes for a better product to come out of a conference committee. I hope I can vote for a bill to go to the President of the United States. My hope is that we will send a bill to the President that will make America stronger, make our borders more secure, and make our immigration system more effective. That's what Americans deserve and what we have a responsibility to deliver. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Mr. Leader.
I'm telling all senators, if they're not in their seats, when the time arrives, I'm going to have a live quorum. We are going to have everybody here when the vote starts. And I know people are anxious to leave, but they better be here or I'm going to have a live quorum and it'll take a lot longer.
Yes, Mr. Leader.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I ask.
Who yields time?
The attention of the Senator from Iowa.
Senator from Iowa.
The Senator from Iowa yield me 5 minutes.
I will yield you 6.5 minutes. As far as I know, nobody on my side wants it, and I'm glad to have you have it. And I want to thank once again to everybody that maybe haven't heard me say it. You had a fair and open process on our committee. There wasn't a single member that didn't get a chance to offer his amendments, and that's the way the process ought to work, and you made it work that way.
Well, Madam President.
Senator has 6 minutes.
Madam President, I thank the distinguished Senator from Iowa for his comments. He also deserves credit. We worked very closely together on this with the schedule and everything else to make sure all people are heard. Madam President, our American story is a story of immigration. It's not only our history, it is our future. Over the last few weeks, many of us have spoken about our own families' immigration stories. We all have such stories. I heard the distinguished Democratic whip, Senator Durbin, speak of the very moving story of his family and also of what he's done with Dreamers. We've talked about our parents and grandparents seeking better lives for us. We can all relate to the most compelling innate urge to sacrifice for the ones we love. We are inspired by our forebears who wanted better lives for us and for themselves and found those opportunities here in America. They taught us the fundamental values of family and hard work and fairness. And with this legislation, we honor those American values. We honor their search for freedom, for prosperity, and for the promise that America's held out to so many for so long. Madam President, I am proud to be a member of the United States Senate. And I would say today is a good day for the Senate. More importantly, it's a good day for the country. Today, with the help of many senators, we'll address a complex problem that's hurting our families and stifling our economy, threatening our security. Several months ago, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans began negotiating and drafting reform legislation, immigration reform legislation. They produced a carefully balanced, fair, and humane proposal that at its core is intended to make meaningful improvements to border security, and most importantly, will help millions of people who dream the same dreams our ancestors did. I'm proud of the role the Judiciary Committee has played in this process, and I thank those senators of both parties who have praised that role. But in late April, the full participation of all 18 members on the Senate Judiciary Committee with unprecedented transparency, with fairness to all, and offering amendments and having the chance to debate them, we held several public markups to consider that legislation. Over 37 hours during the course of 3 weeks, we engaged in vigorous debate in full view of the American public. We considered 212 amendments from Democrats and Republicans. We approved 136 amendments in a room filled with spectators on both sides of the issue. The amendments approved in committee, 47 were Republican amendments, and all but 3 were adopted with a bipartisan vote. Even the staunchest opponents of this legislation have praised that fairness. The world has never seen such a vibrant, cohesive, economically exuberant, and democratically successful experiment as our country. And every one of us as Americans should be proud of that. But a key ingredient of our successful formula has been and will continue to be immigrants anxious to be part of the American experience. They've helped us to be a nation in constant renewal, welcoming and using this constant influx of fresh talent and energy. Just as my grandparents and my wife Marcel's parents made Vermont and America better, they have made us better. And so today is another historic day in the Senate. The Senate will soon complete its work on remedies for a difficult and complex set of issues that's eluded us for years. We passed immigration reform legislation in 2006 under the leadership of the distinguished senator's predecessor, distinguished presiding officer's predecessor, Senator Ted Kennedy. And after the Senate's work, the House of Representatives declined to take up the Senate bill. I hope that won't happen again. This issue is far too important to ignore or to allow it to languish. We shouldn't play politics with what is quintessentially an American issue. This moment, I'd like to think of my dear friend, Senator Kennedy, is smiling down on this chamber. See, right over there. He'd be overjoyed to see us pass this legislation, an issue he cared about deeply. I'd like to think that our old friend would be proud of what we're doing. So in a very few minutes, the Senate will vote to pass a comprehensive solution to our broken immigration system. It will reunite families. It will bring millions of people out of the shadows into our legal system. It will spur job growth and reduce our deficit. It will make us safer. So I'd urge all senators, join with us to ensure a bright future for this great nation we all love by passing comprehensive immigration reform, and in doing so, you make us an even greater nation than we are. I yield the floor.
She's right here.
Who yields time? Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate both leaders giving some time for this. Several of us have been working all week on a package of amendments that were bipartisan and cleared by both Senator Grassley and Senator Hatch's staff. We appreciate their work so much. We're unfortunately not able to get unanimous consent. We tried. I want to thank them very, very much for their effort. They stuck with us all the way to the end. Hopefully, this bill begins to build a bipartisan coalition of senators that want to really solve problems for our country. Our coalition that worked on this, which are both people for the bill and against the bill, we're not able to get it cleared. We're not discouraged. We're going to continue to work, and I want to thank Senators Hatch and Senators Grassley.
Madam President.
Mr. Leader.
We could have order.
Order. Senate will be in order. Take your conversations outside, please. The Senate will be in order.
Madam President, excuse me. We're here today to talk about people, not pages of legislation. But this bill represents human beings, real people. Yes, immigrants. I'm going to talk about two of them today. Over 20 years ago, Astrid Silver crossed the Rio Grande River in a rubber raft, wearing a ruffled dress and patent leather shoes. She was 4 years old. She was a baby. Madam President, it's hard. It's really a lot of stuff going on here.
Senate will be in order.
I know everyone wants to leave, but I would appreciate if we would, everybody be quiet. So Astrid crossed the Rio Grande River with her mom. She had a little dress on, patent leather shoes. She was 4 years old. She doesn't remember Mexico, the country where she was born, but she does remember the day she left Mexico. She cried. She cried because the only thing she could take with her was her baptismal cross and a doll. Her mother cried because although the river was narrow, she knew the current was swift and dangerous, very dangerous. But mother and daughter survived, ducked under a border fence, began their new lives in America. A decade passed before Astrid realized she'd come to America illegally, without proper immigration papers. Her parents cautiously, slowly explained this to their daughter. Astrid's 8th grade class was going to leave Las Vegas, take a trip back here to the nation's capital. Astrid couldn't go. She didn't go. Her parents were afraid to let her travel for fear she would be arrested. She was undocumented. Flying, you see, without proper identification meant running the risk of being detained or deported. A few years later, when Astrid's friends learned to drive, Astrid, once again, was separated from her friends. She couldn't learn to drive. She didn't have even the right to study for the driver's test because she wasn't eligible. When Astrid's classmates headed off to schools across the country, she stayed home. She couldn't leave. So she went to school at a local community college. Astrid has accepted every challenge, every setback with grace, knowing the obstacles could never outweigh the advantages of growing up in the United States, her home. Then, 4 years ago, Astrid's grandmother died. Neither Astrid nor her father could go to Mexico because her dad was also undocumented. They weren't able to go to the funeral. If she left the United States, you see, she couldn't come back. She couldn't come back to the only country she had ever called home. Then there came a time, it came slowly, Mr. President, very cautiously, but finally Astrid knew it was time to raise her voice. In effect, she'd had enough. It's time for her to come out of the shadows, share her story with her friends and with others. But a lot of her friends were just like her, and she could share the stories with they could share stories with each other. So it was time for her classmates, in many instances, and her community, to learn who Astrid Silva really was. So she spoke up. She told her story. She decided to find a public place where I would be, a public event, and give me the first of many heartfelt letters. Mr. President, I only have a few of them. A few of them didn't make it to my office. But I appreciated each and every one of those letters. You see, Astrid became very quickly a dreamer. One of the letters I remember so well, she said in the letter words to this effect: "I've never stolen even a piece of gum, but I feel like a criminal, though I know I'm not a criminal." So I have appreciated every one of those letters that she sent me, because each was a reminder of what is at stake in this debate, a debate that involves our neighbors, friends, and yes, relatives. Each note, each letter indicates that to me. This bipartisan legislation the Senate is poised to pass in just a few minutes doesn't just secure our borders or just mend our broken legal immigration system, but this legislation is what Astrid has advocated, what the Dreamers have advocated, and others have advocated. This legislation is what she and millions have hoped for and, yes, Mr. President, prayed for. The bill paves the way for people just like Astrid, people who are American and all but paid for. It allows them to become full participants in our great society. It acknowledges the contribution of generations of immigrants who founded this country and built it into the superpower it is today. Mr. President, immigrants just like a man named Israel Goldfarb. He left Russia. He was Jewish. He was being persecuted, he and his family. So he came to America as a boy. Now, this man was my wife's dad. Now, Mr. President, I often think of him for a lot of reasons. He died as a real young man, and perhaps a lot of people think that he didn't contribute much to our society. But he had one child. My wonderful wife. And now we have 16 grandchildren. So he contributed that. 5 children, 16 grandchildren. Mr. President, on his deathbed, as I said, as a young man, he gave me his ring. I've worn this ring for those many, many years. I take it off at night, put it on every day. This watch I have. Mr. President, my watch stopped running a couple of months ago, and the jeweler said it's broken, it's worn out, it's 50 years old. You know, it's an old-fashioned watch. You have to wind it every morning. But they fixed it. I got the watch back. It's good for another 50 years. Mr. President, I could buy a different watch, but I'm not going to buy a different watch. These are who I am, and they remind me every day of this man who came to America as Israel Goldfarb, and like all of his family, changed his name to Earl Gould. My wife, when I met her as a sophomore in high school, she was Landra Gould. So, Mr. President, this bipartisan legislation that we're poised to pass in just a little while doesn't just secure our borders or just mend our broken legal system. This is the legislation that's been advocated, and it paves a way for people like Astrid, and frankly, people like my father-in-law, may he rest in peace. It acknowledges the contribution of generations of immigrants who founded this country. This historic legislation recognizes that today's immigrants came for the right reason, the same reason as generations before them, the same as Israel Goldfarb, to achieve a dream we take for granted, the right to live in a land that's free. Ted Kennedy said it best. From Jamestown to the Pilgrims to the Irish to today's workers, people have come to this country in search of opportunity. They've sought nothing more than a chance to work hard and bring a better life to themselves and their families. They came to our country with their hearts and minds full of hope. That's what he said. The bipartisan legislation before the United States Senate today respects and fulfills that hope, the prayer of Astrid, and millions just like her. It'll help 11 million people tired of looking over their shoulders and fearing deportation to get right with the law and start down the pathway to citizenship. The path is going to be really hard. Penalties, fines, work, pay taxes, stay out of trouble, learn English. But they're willing to do that, every one of them. It'll mean going to the back of the line. It's tough, I repeat, but it's fair. And above all, it's very practical. It makes unprecedented investments in our borders. It cracks down on crooked employers like Senator McCain talked about earlier today, who exploit and abuse immigrant workers. And it reforms our legal immigration system. This legislation will be good for America's national security as well as its economic security. Mr. President, this will reduce the deficit by $1 trillion. How's that for economic security? 6 years ago, the last time we considered a sweeping immigration overhaul led by Senators McCain and, yes, that good man who became Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar. That didn't work. Prospects for a bipartisan solution were very dim. On the last day, the immigration bill fell because of a procedural roadblock. Ted Kennedy urged those of us who believe deeply in this cause to keep the faith. Here's what he said. We'll be back and we will prevail. America always finds a way to solve its problems, Ted said. Expand its frontiers and move closer to its ideals. It is not always easy, but it is the American way. That's what Ted Kennedy said. Because of the Gang of Eight, these courageous senators, four Democrats, four Republicans, Schumer, Durbin, Menendez, and of course the quiet one who did so much, Senator Bennett. I admire John McCain. He and I came to the Congress together more than 31 years ago. We came to the Senate together. Have we fought with each other? Oh, yeah. But we care a great deal about each other. Mr. President, John McCain, no matter what happens, I will be his friend and he will be my friend. I admire what he's done. He was truly a leader, as he has been for so long in this country. Lindsey Graham. Mr. President, he's up for re-election. Is this a badge of courage? It sure is. Marco Rubio, Jeff Flake. I admire every one of them. And I'm not going to forget about Bob Corker. I'm not going to forget about mentioning Governor Hoeven. They allowed us to get votes with this. I will always admire these two again. Courageous men who stepped forward, stepped out of the crowd and did something that was right. So, Mr. President, they're wonderful, all of them. You see, Senator Kennedy knew the day would come when a group of senators, divided by party but united by a love of country, would see the fight to the finish, and that's what we did. That's what these 10 men allowed us to do. And I'm not going to ever forget about the man seated right behind me, Senator Leahy. His markup will go down in history. It was the way that we are here today. He's my friend. I will always admire how he handles everything he does, but especially what he did on this bill. So the day is today. And while I'm sad that Senator Kennedy isn't here to see history made, I know that he is looking at us proudly and loudly. Remember that voice? But you know, Mr. President, he's not alone. I have no doubt that my father-in-law, is here in spirit. Astrid Silva is here today. I'm sure she's in the gallery someplace. And she'll be looking down from where she's seated when the United States Senate votes to expand this country's frontiers and moves it closer to its ideals. But she's not here alone. She's here representing millions of others just like her, people have hoped and prayed for this day. Mr. President, their prayers have been answered. But these prayers, their hopes have not gotten us to the finish line yet. The finish line is very close to here, down this very long hallway to the House of Representatives. Mr. President, I'm reminded in closing of a poem, a song. Here's what it says. I can see a new day soon to be, when the storm clouds are all past and the sun shines in a world that is free. I can see a new man standing tall, with his head high and his heart proud and afraid of nothing at all. I can see a new day soon to be, when the storm clouds are all past and the sun shines in a world that is free. Colleagues, I'm confident the House of Representatives will pass this legislation because I can see a new man standing tall, with his head high, his heart proud, and afraid of nothing at all.
The clerk will read the bill for the third time.
Calendar number 80 S744, a bill to provide for comprehensive immigration reform and for other purposes.
Are there sufficient? The question occurs on passage of F774 as amended. Is there a sufficient second? There is a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso.
No.
Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chiesa. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn? No. Mr. Cowan? Aye. Mr. Crapo? No. Mr. Cruz? No. Mr. Donnelly?
Aye.
Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Enzi? Mrs. Feinstein? Mrs. Fisher? Mr. Flake? Mr. Franken? Mrs. Gillibrand? Mr. Graham? Mr. Grassley? Mrs. Hagan? Mr. Harkin? Mr. Hatch? Mr. Heinrich? Ms. Heitkamp? Mr. Heller? Ms. Hirono? Mr. Hoven? Mr. Inhofe? Mr. Isaacson? Mr. Johans?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin?
No.
Mr. Johnson of South Dakota? Mr. Kane?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mr. Kirk?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Ms. Landrieu? Mr. Leahy? Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Levin? Mr. Manchin? Mr. McCain? Mrs. McCaskill? Mr. McConnell? Mr. Menendez? Mr. Merkley? Ms. Mikulski? Mr. Moran?
Reorder in the Senate.
Ms. Murkowski? Mr. Murphy? Mrs. Murray? Mr. Nelson? Mr. Paul?
No.
Mr. Portman? Mr. Pryor? Mr. Reed of Rhode Island? Mr. Reed of Nevada? Mr. Risch? Mr. Roberts? Mr. Rockefeller? Mr. Rubio? Mr. Sanders? Mr. Schatz? Mr. Schumer? Mr. Scott? Mr. Sessions? Mrs. Shaheen? Mr. Shelby? Ms. Stabenow? Mr. Tester? Mr. Thune? Mr. Toomey? Mr. Udall of Colorado? Mr. Udall of New Mexico? Mr. Vitter?
No.
Mr. Warner? Ms. Warren? Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden.
You are recorded no.
Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Ayotte, Baldwin, Baucus, Bekich, Bennett, Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Chiesa, Collins, Coons, Corker, Cowan, Donnelly, Durbin, Feinstein, Flake, Franken, Gillibrand, Graham, Hagan, Harkin, Hatch, Heinrich, Heitkamp, Heller, Hirono, Hoeven, Johnson of South Dakota, Kane, King, Kirk, Klobuchar, Landrieu, Leahy, Levin, Manchin, McCain, McCaskill, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Murkowski, Murphy, Murray, Nelson, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Rubio, Sanders, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Warren, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Chambliss, Coates, Coburn, Cochran, Cornyn, Crapo, Cruz, Enzi, Fisher, Grassley, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lee, McConnell, Moran, Paul, Portman, Risch, Roberts, Scott, Sessions, Shelby, Thune, Toomey, Vitter, and Wicker.
Is there anyone in the chamber wishing to change their vote? Before the chair announces the vote, expressions of approval or disapproval are not permitted in the Senate. The yeas on this bill are 68, the nays are 32. The bill as amended is passed. No. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. Sergeant of Arms will restore order in the gallery.
The Senate will be in order. The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President,
If the senator will suspend. The Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, I would ask to dispense with the calling of the quorum.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I am prepared to make a request for a consent. I believe the Republican leader will respond, and then at his conclusion.
Here, could we have the Senate quiet down?
Please take your conversations outside the chamber. The Senate will please be in order.
Mr. President, I'm prepared to make a unanimous consent request. I believe the Republican leader will respond, and at the conclusion of his response, I would like to be recognized to make additional comments. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-1238, the Keep Student Loans Affordable Act, the text of which is at the desk. The bill be read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
I object.
Objection is heard. The Republican leader.
I ask consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of a bill introduced earlier today by Senators Manchin, King, Alexander, Coburn, Burr, and Carper. Further, that there be 1 hour of debate equally divided in the usual form, no amendments be in order to the measure, the bill be subject to any applicable budget point of order, and that following the use or yielding back of time and disposition of any waivers if necessary, the bill be read a 3rd time, and the Senate proceed to vote on the passage of the bill.
Is there objection?
I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, let me thank the Republican leader for cooperating. We are attempting to move forward legislation with respect to student loans. We have reached, will shortly reach July 1st. At that point, the student loan rate for subsidized Stafford loans doubles from 3.4% to 6.8%. The legislation I propose would be a 1-year extension of the 3.4% rate, allowing students, low and middle income students, to continue to benefit from a low interest rate. Our core principles in advancing this 1-year extension of present law is that we believe, and I think this is shared by all of my colleagues, that talented students deserve access to college education. They need affordable loans and Pell Grants and other financial aid. And we also believe that interest rates should not be set any higher than necessary to protect the taxpayer and break even on the program, that it shouldn't be a profit center for the federal government, which it is today. And we also believe very strongly that when students take these loans out, particularly the subsidized loans, they deserve predictability. They should know how much they'll have to repay. So if you are going to go for an adjustable rate, there has to be a cap, a reasonable cap. In fact, my understanding is in the history of the federal student loan program, there's either been an adjustable rate with a cap or a fixed rate. We've never let students solely at the mercy of the market. We provide subsidized loans to students because we believe we have to invest in America, in their talent, in their ability not only to advance their own lives, but also to contribute to the greater life of America. It should not be a program that is designed to generate revenue, and the reality is today, wittingly or unwittingly, this program, and indeed the proposals that have been put on the table, are generating huge amounts of profit for the federal government. It's been estimated about $50 billion, I think, to date this year. We should be investing in the potential of young Americans, not looking at them as profit centers to help us adjust the deficit. And I know there's been great efforts on the part of my colleagues, sincere efforts, thoughtful efforts by many. My colleagues, Senator Alexander, Senator Manchin, Senator King, Senator Harkin, the chairman of the committee, Senator Warren, Senator Hagan, Senator Franken, Senator Salmo. There's been a great deal of effort, but we're not there yet, and I think we need, frankly, at least 1 more year so that we can sit down and do this correctly. If you look at the proposals that are out there, there's a short-run attractiveness because the rates have been configured so that they look pretty low. But if you follow the rates out within 2, 3, 4 years, they're above the law that goes into effect on July 1st. They're above the 6.8% rate. And it's almost as if we're looking back a few years ago, not about student loans, but about mortgages. There are a lot of people that were sitting on 5% or fixed rate mortgages. Someone walked in and said, have I got a deal for you? I can give you 2 years at 3%. Now it goes up, but don't worry, because you can readjust it down the road and refinance it. Well, we found out, because of many circumstances, come 2008, 2009, there was no getting out. In fact, a lot of people discovered they would have been better off sticking with a fixed loan. Well, that's an analogy. That's not right exactly on point, but if you look at all of these proposals, the arc of the increase in interest rates is going up. And by the way, it hasn't fully incorporated what the Federal Reserve has already said publicly. Chairman Bernanke has made it very clear that they're ending quantitative easing. That means one thing: interest rates go up. And they might go up a lot faster than we even expect right now. And I think another important point, which is really critical, is that the proposals we've seen so far have not had a cap on them, an adequate cap. And there's been some discussion, well, we don't need a cap because if you consolidate a loan, there's a cap built into the consolidation program. Well, first of all, there's a problem with that, in that except for the subsidized Stafford loans, the other federally supported loans start accruing interest even while you're still in school. And so you're building up a big, big, big mountain of debt, and when you consolidate, what you're doing essentially is stretching out the payments, which making a longer term, which adds more interest. It's like the difference between a short-term loan and a long-term loan. You end up paying a lot more interest on your house than you do on a 2 or 3 year loan on the car. So for many, many reasons, both technical and otherwise, we believe, particularly as we're several days away from July 1st, we need to go ahead and give this body the time to deliberate. Frankly, we just passed a historic piece of legislation. That was not done in the waning hours of the session. It wasn't done without hearings. It wasn't done with a lot of back and forth. It wasn't done a lot of tension on the floor. And yet we're proposing fundamental changes to our federal student loan program in the waning hours before a recess. 36 Democrats have joined me, along with Senator Hagan, principally, to extend this lending rate for 1 more year. We have in the past been able to come together. In fact, we adopted the 3.4% interest rate, fixed rate. In 2007, the vote in this Senate was 79-12. Republicans and Democrats saying, you know, a good deal for students? A low interest rate. And I think we still have to look for a much better deal than has been suggested by some of the proposals. So we are also fiscally responsible because we are paying for this roughly about $4 billion. There is a tax provision which I think should be closed on its own face, but it would allow us to pay for this extension for 1 year. And I will remind my colleagues that a year ago we did precisely the same thing. Now some would say, well, we haven't used the year well enough, but if you think about the debate we had on background checks and firearms, if you think about this historic debate on immigration, if you think about many of the other serious debates we have had, I think we have been engaged on this floor decisively, but now it's time, again, to move to this education issue, this affordability issue. So, Mr. President, I am disappointed, and I'm sure my colleagues who are suggesting alternative proposals are disappointed, but I'm disappointed that we cannot at least tell students today, we've got your back. You are going to be safe for another year, 3.4% interest, and in that time, we really have to fix this, and not just simply changing around interest rates, but also, what about paying down the debt that's outstanding? a huge problem, a $1 trillion problem. What about the incentives for lowering the cost of college? What about the other structural changes that we have to make? And they will unlikely be made if we somehow leave here with a fix that ultimately, in a very short period of time, raises rates beyond the 6.8% and also takes really the pressure, the legitimate pressure for us, not just to take and treat one part of the problem, but comprehensively deal with the issue of the cost of higher education for families throughout. Now, with that, Mr. President, I've been asked to propose the unanimous consent. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business until 7 p.m., with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia.
If I may respond, and to my dear friend from Rhode Island, who I have the utmost respect for, we just have a respectful difference as far as how to approach this problem, and we're working through it. We really, truly are working, and we will work through it. We had a charge a year ago to fix it, so we started working on that. The President, in timely fashion, gave us a piece of legislation that had a longer-term fix, 10 years. We took that and worked off of that original proposal given to us by the administration and by the President, and we start working in a bipartisan manner to make this work. And with that being said, we looked at the 3.4%, and I will say, Mr. President, that a majority of our Senate colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, did not understand that the 3.4% only affected those that were subsidized loans. That's the smallest amount of loans we have out there. I think the majority of our colleagues and the majority of the people, the majority of the press, thought that we fixed the 3.4% for everybody that had a student loan. That wasn't the case. So we wanted to go back and make sure if we do something, we do it for everybody. Because the person who has income limits and qualified for the subsidized loan, the first year they get that loan is $2,500. The second year is $35. Third year is $45, and the fifth year is $55. That's the maximum they can borrow. They can't get through school on that. So you know what? They borrow the non-subsidized. Guess what they've been paying for the non-subsidized? The 6.8. Guess what students that have what we call the plus loans? They've been paying 7.9, but we're not hearing anything about that. Put it in perspective as dollars. If we have 1 year extension, as my dear colleagues have suggested, to try to fix the problem again, that'll be about a $2 billion savings of interest payments that would be put on the backs of students. That's a tremendous amount of money. Guess what happens if the proposal, the bipartisan, the only bipartisan proposal, if we pass our bipartisan proposal, it saves $8.8 billion and everybody participates. Even the subsidized loan, the student that struggled the hardest, that needs most of the help, they get most of the help, not only on their subsidized, but they get it on their unsubsidized. We've looked at everything possible. So we have a piece of legislation which we think not only fixes, but basically repairs a broken system. You know, you look at where we are today, and we looked at sequestering, and we look at on and on and on. I've been here for not quite 3 years, Mr. President, and I've watched us kick the can down the street to where my toe is hurting. My toe is hurting. We've kicked this can so much, and it's starting to kick back. We need to start giving the people of this great country the confidence that we can work as a functional body, as respectful as possible between Democrats, Republicans, and independents, coming together, putting our country first, putting our students first, not playing politics. And let me tell you what we agreed on. We agreed that Democrat and Republican in this bipartisan bill, that not $1 should go to debt reduction. We don't believe that the students trying to get an education to better their quality of life, to improve their quality of life, their economic condition, and the economic condition of our great country should have to be burdened with the debt and reducing the debt of this nation. We can do that by them being productive citizens. We agreed on that. That's something that wasn't agreed on before because there were people talking about they wanted surpluses to go to debt reduction. We've taken surpluses out and reduced the rate as low as humanly possible. It's been scored. It's been scored. We're bringing rates down. If you look at the top rate at 7.9%, that's going to come to 6.21 if you have a plus loan. If you have a loan, which is a graduate Stafford loan, that's going to come from a 6.8 to 5.21. And if you look at all the undergraduates, if it's a subsidized loan and a non-subsidized undergraduate, they all go to 3.6. That's a tremendous savings. That's the $8.8 billion. That's what we're asking for. So I respectfully, and I mean that respectfully, disagree with my colleagues that have signed on to a one-year extension believing that we're going to be able to come up with an agreement or a compromise that is better than what we have before us because we've worked this out with Senator Carper from Delaware, Senator King from Maine, myself from West Virginia, Senator Alexander from Tennessee. Those are 4 former governors. We know we had to work together because we had to make things happen immediately. At the end of the year, everything had to balance out. And then we had Senator Burr and we had Senator Coburn who have been here and understand the finances as well as any people in this body. So I respectfully ask that as we go away, and I want the students and I want all the people that have loans right now not to worry. July 1st will come. We'll come back here probably by, I think, the 10th, 9th or 10th of July. It'll be first order of business that we both asked for. Both of our bills will be on first order of business. And I assure you we will come up with a compromise agreement that we can work out that will give the relief that the students, those who are desiring an education, those who want to better their lives, will have that opportunity and be able to have some stability and not have the increased rates passed on because we'll make this retroactive. So with that, I would yield the floor.
President. The Senator from Maine. I don't have a great deal to add to Senator Manchin's comments except to point out that everyone in this body wants to do best by our students. Everyone understands the importance of education. Everyone understands how expensive it is. Everyone understands the problem of the debt burden on our students. And we're all trying to search for a solution that can garner bipartisan support, can pass the Senate, pass the House, and go to the President. The proposal that we put forward before the body today is based upon, in many ways, the proposal made by the President in his budget. It's similar to a provision that has already passed the House. And I think a couple of points should be made. One is there's a lot of talk about a floating rate, and I think people think of mortgages and adjustable rate mortgages and the rate changes from year to year. Under our proposal, once a student takes out a loan in a given year at whatever the rate is that year, that rate is fixed for the life of the loan. The following year, if interest rates, and we're talking about the 10-year Treasury bill of the United States government, one of the lowest interest rates there is, if that goes up, then it would go up. If it goes down, for the next year's loan, not for the loan that's already been taken out. I think we've learned in the current circumstance the folly of Congress trying to set interest rates. Because inadvertently, by setting 6.8% and 3.4% 5 or 6 years ago, that looked like a great deal. Today, it's generating billions of dollars to the Treasury on the backs of our students. So our solution, I think, is a common sense solution, and that is to base the interest rate for the students at the lowest available rate to virtually anybody in our society, which would be the 10-year Treasury bill plus 1.85%, which protects the Treasury from the costs of administering the program and the risks inherent in the program. And that way, we'll have certainty in the program and the lowest interest rate that would generally be available in the society. Now, if we started with a blank sheet of paper and said we want the federal government to provide loans to students I believe we would end up where this plan has ended up. It's where the President ended up, it's where the House has ended up, and I think we have an opportunity. Now, the question is, should we extend for a year and take more time? I'm new here, but I stood here during the debates on the sequester where both parties put forward their proposals. Neither party got the votes, and we ended up with the sequester. We did exactly the same thing with student loans about a month ago. Each party put forward their proposal, neither party got their votes, and here we are just about at the deadline, and the rates are going to double for those subsidized Stafford loans. I don't know what we're going to know a year from now that we don't know now. And I believe that the time is now to try to come to a resolution that meets everybody's requirements. And, Mr. President, we're not that far apart. The differences separating us in this body are not that far apart. And I believe that we have an opportunity here not only to solve this problem fairly to our students, but to demonstrate to the country that we're able to make decisions and not simply delay them for another year or 2 years. So that's why I rise today to support the bill that Senator Manchin and I and others have put together, Senator Burr, Senator Alexander, who I think is one of the most respected members of this body, particularly on education matters, and Senator Coburn. We've got a strong bill, and I think as people see the details, understand it better, understand the terms, understand the effects, which would be to save students in America over the next 3 or 4 years something like $50 billion, which if we don't resolve this problem is going to come into the Treasury on the backs of our students. I don't think that's a result that we want. So I think we've got a responsible proposal. It's a bipartisan one, and I believe it deserves full and fair consideration. I'm sure that all these proposals will have a lot of discussion once we're back in session a week from now, a week and a half from now, and I hope we can come to a resolution because the students of America deserve to know 2 things: that Congress has their back on student loans and that their Congress is, in fact, able to make decisions and handle issues and move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Senator from Rhode Island. Mr. President, I see the Senator from New York and the Senator from Colorado on the floor. I don't know if they seek recognition. I know this has been a terrific day for them as 2 of the principal architects of the immigration bill that we just passed. It has been a landmark achievement, and I'm prepared to speak for about 15 minutes on my climate bill. But I'm going to be here for a while, and if the Senator from New York would prefer to proceed, then I will allow him to proceed. That will also allow me to relieve the presiding officer, who I understand needs to go upstairs for a moment. So I will yield to Senator Schumer with the hope that upon the conclusion of his remarks, I will be recognized.
I want to thank my colleague from Rhode Island. As usual, he is gracious and he is thoughtful, as well as being an outstanding legislator with a great deal of passion. So I know that he wants to go to the floor and speak on the issue that he is ready to speak about. But again, his grace and his kindness are always present, and I appreciate it. Mr. President, I return to the floor to just say some words of thanks. We had limited time before, and I wanted to speak to the nub of the issue. So I wanted to thank some people. And the first person I thought I'd mention is how much a dream this comprehensive bill has been to so many people. At the top of the list, of course, is Ted Kennedy, who is one of the greatest human beings I have ever met in my life. And he had the subcommittee on immigration before me. This wouldn't have happened without his guidance and leadership. Did we make changes from what he did? Obviously. But did his basic feeling and structure and knowledge that it had to be bipartisan all carry forward on this bill? Absolutely. And we know that Ted is smiling as he's looking down on this today, and we know that he'll continue to inspire not only those of us in the Senate, but also the country as we move forward. But I wanted to spend a few minutes, and I very much appreciate my colleague from Rhode Island yielding, to thank my staff. You know, we are lucky on our staff. Under the leadership of Mike Lynch, our Chief of Staff, we are a team. It's an amazing team. And everyone covers each other. Everyone looks out for each other. When sometimes I'm upset and I say, who did what? Nobody did anything wrong. They're all watching each other's back. And that's the lesson that Lynch has taught all of them, and it's a great lesson. We're close-knit. We socialize, we have fun, they truly like each other, and this wouldn't have happened, certainly without them. Certainly without them. And that's what I wanted to do. I want to praise each of my colleagues. I've done that repeatedly on the Gang of Eight. Before I talk about my staff, I mentioned this outside, but I want to mention it on the floor. Every one of them, you can say exactly the same thing for each of the 8 in the gang. It wouldn't have happened without their presence. It was an amazing team, and each contributed something in his own way. Each contributed a great deal in his own way. And at impasses, different people rose to the fore and lifted us out of those impasses. It was an amazing group, and I'm not going to get into each individual right now, but I do want to thank the Gang of 8. We have bonded, we have become friends, and we've accomplished something, hopefully, that will carry forward and become law. Today's few minutes, I want to thank my staff. My staff, like all Americans, are the children or great-grandchildren or great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of immigrants. They've shared their stories through this process. I know this was deeply personal for each of them. And every week, the entire staff, just about the entire staff, got together for an immigration meeting, and everybody contributed. So I want to take some time to thank them all. They worked so hard to fix this system. It was not only a dream of so many in this Senate, it was a dream of theirs. And one thing for sure can be said, without them, we wouldn't be here. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And in fact, the other 7, and I think every one of them grew to respect our staff as we respected their staffs. And that's another great thing that happened here is the bonding. So I want to mention some of the individuals here. First, my chief counsel, Stephanie Martz. She poured her whole heart and soul into the bill. She's got young kids. She's got soccer games. She's got a very busy schedule. But for this bill, she missed bedtimes due to late-night meetings or conference calls. How many times on a Saturday did I talk to her when she was at some athletic event for one of her kids? And you could hear the cheering and the running up and down in the background. But Stephanie has a unique ability to help build coalitions. When one group or another was upset, and believe me, that probably happened every 5 minutes in this legislation, there was Stephanie, soothing them, calming them, but telling them the truth, so they trusted her. An indispensable part of our ability to get this done. Through the rough patches, she never gave up on our team, and I know that Kyle and Nora and Pip are going to be happy to have Mommy back, and maybe there'll be another tournament, ice hockey tournament in Rochester next year when whatever legislation we're working on them rises to the fore. To the great genius, and I started referring to him at our meetings as my immigration genius, and he was. The intellectual force, the creative force who propelled this effort was one Leon Fresco, the son of Cuban immigrants from Miami. I think it was about 5 years ago he took this job. He was a very successful immigration lawyer. But he took this job because he wanted to do immigration reform. He's worked on many other things. His creativity has shown its mark in Schumerland on so many different issues. But this was his dream, and he put every atom of his body into this. Like me, he's voluble. During our staff meetings, we'd yell at each other, and it became a joke. Because I once said, "Shut up, Leon." So John McCain greeted him at each meeting, "Shut up, Leon." And we all loved it. But Leon, your fierce determination, your innate intelligence, your deep love of this country, great. And to Mama Fresco, Leon's mom, who was so proud of her son. And it was great to meet your parents, who were immigrants, who were the American dream. The people I spoke about on the floor a few minutes ago were embodied in the Frescos. And how about to Sophie? Leon's wife got pregnant during all this. So he wasn't devoting 100% of his time to immigration reform, but close to it. And there she was, Sophie, indomitable and quiet, doing the job. Our legislative team is a great team, and everyone pitched in to do immigration, led by Heather McHugh. Heather's advice and counsel were invaluable. She communicated with our colleagues, and each one of our staff has a great attribute, and Heather is always wary of me going a little too far or a little too fast or a little too quick. And she'll come into the office and say, you know, you better think about this. And I know I've got trouble. But again, incredible. And because we have the immigration so multifaceted, all our staff contributed. Megan Tyra, I consider, no offense to all my colleagues, the best health LA on the Hill. She helped create the ACA. But of course, there were many benefit issues that occurred. And there was Megan, solving them. Anna Taylor, the only person on our staff with a deep Southern Arkansas accent, came from Blanche Lincoln's staff. There are tax issues. There she was, solving them all. John Jones was incredible. He stepped up and handled many of the issues. Dan Rudofsky, Veronica Durand. They drafted summaries and talking points and spreadsheets. And you know, when things got tough, Becca Kelly and Erin Vaughn, each the mother of children less than one, just let nothing get in the way of them doing this while at the same time maintaining focus on their kids and the bill. It might surprise you to know, Mr. President, I have a very good press team. And Brian Fallon, Matt House, Matt Young, Meredith Kelly, Lindsay Kryzak, Marissa Kaufman, Josh Malofsky. They learned the substance of immigration and spun it into a beautiful, beautiful web that the public could understand. Our DPCC team, led by Ryan McGonahy, kept policy and press teams singing off the same praise sheet, keeping our caucus up to date. And then, of course, as every one of us, we have great administrative staffers. Alex Victor, who came to the office as a young kid from Long Island, as a young helper in the Long Island office, is now my unflappable executive assistant. No matter how tough and intense things get in our office, and they do, she is just steady as a rock, getting things done. She and her colleagues, Megan Runyon, Alice James, Jessica Bonfiglio, Kristen Mollett, Rob Kelly, Ellen Cahill, Claire Russell, all kept us administratively going. I mentioned the members. They're great. I have so much to say about each of them. Chairman Leahy, I want to thank you. You're probably on your way back to your beautiful farm in Vermont, but for shepherding this bill through the Judiciary Committee, and everyone's praised your open and inclusive process, well known. I want to thank Bruce Cohen, who this is the capstone of his career, and we all know how important he is to the Judiciary Committee. And his big shoes were ably and elegantly filled by Christine Lucius as chief counsel. But J.P. Dowd and Matt Verkstes, John Amaya, Lara Flint, Alex Givens, Chris Leopold, Anya McMurray all did a great job. As most people know here, Harry Reid is one of my best friends in the world. And his unwavering support and confidence that we could get this done was essential. And he has a great staff who lent constant help to us. David Crone and Bill Douster, Serena Hoy, Kate Leone, Bruce King, Angela Arboleda, all did a great job. And the staffs of the other members, I want to just mention a few of them. I hope they're listening. Kerry Talbot and Carissa Wilhite and Molly Groom of Senator Menendez's staff, Joe Zogby, Mara Silver, Vaishali Yeldani with Senator Durbin, Jonathan Davidson, Sergio Gonzalez, who worked for Senator Bennett. So many staffers. As I said, we got to know each other real well through all the meetings. We had a lot of disagreements, some tough arguments. We all stuck together. And Senator Feinstein's team. Senator Feinstein put that ag section together. Amazingly, the growers and the farm workers are for this bill. That's good of Senator Feinstein's great leadership. And Chris Thompson, Neil Quinter, and Kim Alden did a great job there. We worked as closely in this endeavor with the Republican staffs as the Democratic staffs, and I owe them a great deal of thanks. Cesar Conde, Sally Canfield, Enrique Gonzalez, let me pay him a compliment. He was sort of the equivalent, not quite in my opinion, but close to the equivalent of Leon Fresco on the Republican side. John Bass Solisi of Senator Rubio's staff, Mark Delich, Catherine Zill with Senator McCain, Matt Rimkunis, Sergio Sarkany, David Glackham with Senator Graham. When we had our meetings, all these staffers were there. Chandler Moss. At first, he was giving Senator Flake some tough advice. And just as McCain would talk about Leon, I would talk about Chandler. I now owe him a dinner. I said, Chandler, I'm taking you out to dinner if this bill passes the Senate, so pick your restaurant, don't make it too expensive. Elizabeth Taylor of Senator Flake's staff, and then the great floor staff, Gary Myrick, and Tim and Trish and Meredith and Tequiwa, Dan, Brad, Stephanie. They run the place like clockwork. As recently as today, when there were more requests than time and people had to go home at 4 o'clock. Emma Fulkerson of Senator Murray's staff. Rima and MJ of Durbin's staff, who did a great job whipping. And, frankly, Dave Schiappa and the Republican floor staff as well. We got a lot of help from Senate Appropriations, Finance, and Budget Committees, and I thank them. And I want to thank the rest of my staff in New York and D.C. They're the wind beneath our wings. If we didn't feel good and safe in New York, we couldn't take the risks we do here in Washington. And they make that possible. So, I thank them all. Finally, and Leon, always making sure everything goes exactly right, the Ledge Council staff, Ms. Easley and the others, they work 24/7 to turn these legislative ideas into the 1,000-page bill, as has been remarked over and over again. And it needed that many pages because it was so complicated, but they did a great job as well. So once again, to my staff, from Mike Lynch all the way through, I think, as every member probably thinks, I have the best staff in the Hill. It's certainly the best staff I've ever had as 39 years as a legislator. And without you, we couldn't do it. So tonight we're going to celebrate the going away and the ascension of one of our old-time staffers, and we'll all have a great time together. But I am blessed. I'm blessed to have a family, my wife and daughters, who put up with me through thick and thin. And I'm blessed to have two other families, my Senate colleagues, who I do regard as my family, and my staff, who I also regard as my family. So although I'm not Irish, I got a big, big, big family, and they're the greatest, all three. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I thank Sheldon for, again,